never should have opened that hiking forum. Never should have clicked on that innocent-looking post asking for newcomers to join a weekend camping trip. But I did. And now I'm running through these pitch-black woods, my phone's flashlight barely cutting through the darkness, trying to record what happened. Maybe someone will find this and learn the truth. It started simple enough. I was tired of being the indoor guy, the one who never took risks. After watching countless survival videos online, I convinced myself I could handle a real adventure. The forum post seemed perfect. Experienced hikers willing to guide beginners through a weekend trek. 5 spots available. No pressure, they said. Just good people enjoying nature. I met them at the trailhead early Saturday morning. Mason was our leader. Tall and confident with expensive gear and a know-it-all attitude. Elena stood quietly to the side, watching everyone with intense eyes. She'd done this trail before, she said, but didn't elaborate. Trevor couldn't stop cracking jokes about bears and getting lost. The kind of jokes that don't seem funny anymore. Then there was Ivy, clutching her backpack like a shield, looking like she wanted to run back to her car. I should have noticed the signs. The way Elena's smile never reached her eyes. How Mason kept checking his phone, even though he'd told us there was no signal up here. The strange symbols carved into the trailhead marker that everyone pretended not to see. But I was too excited, too eager to prove myself. As we started up the trail, the morning sun warm on our backs, I felt like I was finally doing something worth talking about. If only I'd known that by nightfall one of us would be missing. By the next day most of us would be gone. And by the third day, well, that's what this recording is about. Let me tell you how the darkness came alive. The hike started out normal enough. Mason led us up narrow trails that wound through tall pine trees. The air smelled fresh, and birds chirped overhead. Trevor kept us laughing with his silly jokes, while Elena hung back, always watching. Ivy stayed close to me, jumping at every snapped twig. Looking back, I should have noticed how the trail kept getting less marked, less traveled. Mason said it was a shortcut, but Elena's face tightened every time he mentioned it. By afternoon, the path had almost disappeared. The trees grew closer together, their branches blocking out more and more sunlight. That's when the first strange thing happened. We stopped for lunch, and Mason set his backpack down, the one with our satellite phone and emergency gear. He turned away for just a minute to check his map. When he looked back, the backpack was gone. We searched everywhere, but it had vanished like it never existed. Trevor laughed it off, saying a bear must have grabbed it, but there were no tracks, no signs of anything dragging it away. It was just gone. Elena's face went pale when she saw where the backpack had been. There was a symbol carved into the rock beneath it, 3 curved lines intersecting in a way that hurt my eyes to look at. As the sun started setting, Mason led us to a clearing that wasn't on any of our maps. He said it would make a perfect campsite, but Ivy grabbed my arm and whispered, "Something's wrong. This place, it feels wrong." I knew what she meant. The clearing was too perfect, too circular, like something had carved it out of the forest. That night around the campfire, Elena told us about a hiker who disappeared in these woods last year. They never found him, she said, but people say you can still hear his voice at night, calling for help. Trevor laughed. Ivy cried. I pretended not to notice how Mason's hands shook as he stoked the fire. None of us slept well that first night. And by morning, one of us would be gone. I woke up to Ivy's scream. The sun wasn't up yet, just a faint gray light filtering through the trees. Trevor's tent was empty. His sleeping bag was still warm, like he'd just stepped out. But his shoes were still there, neatly placed at the tent's entrance. He's just gone for a bathroom break, Mason said, but his voice shook. We called Trevor's name, searching the area around our camp. That's when I saw them, the footprints. They started at Trevor's tent, bare feet pressed into the damp earth. But they made no sense. They walked in a perfect circle around our campsite, getting closer with each loop, until they just stopped. like Trevor had vanished mid-step. Elena stood staring at the footprints, her face white. "We need to leave," she whispered. "Now." But Mason shook his head. "We can't leave Trevor," he insisted. "He's probably just lost. We need to find him." Ivy started crying, quiet sobs that seemed too loud in the morning stillness. That's when we heard it, Trevor's laugh, echoing through the trees. But something was wrong with it. It sounded hollow, like someone trying to remember how laughter should sound. We followed the sound, pushing through thick bushes, calling his name. The laughter led us deeper into the woods, where the trees grew so close together that their branches wove into a ceiling above us. I noticed more symbols carved into the bark, the same 3 curved lines from the rock, but larger, fresher. Elena saw me looking at them and grabbed my arm. "Don't stare at them too long," she warned. "They change things." Mason kept pushing us forward, but I could see fear in his eyes now. The laughter grew fainter, then stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. We stood in that dark part of the forest, 4 people instead of 5, realizing that something impossible had just happened. And somehow, I knew this was just the beginning. The forest grew colder with each passing minute after Trevor's disappearance. Mason led us deeper into the woods, claiming he knew a safe route to the ranger station. Elena watched him with growing suspicion, her hands clenched into fists. "We need to tell them," Elena finally said, her voice cutting through the silence. Mason stopped walking but didn't turn around. "Tell us what?" I asked, watching frost spread across tree branches despite the summer heat. Ivy huddled closer to me, shivering. Mason's shoulders slumped. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered. "Not this time." When he turned, his eyes were filled with tears. "I thought I could control it. Make a deal." Elena laughed bitterly. "Like last time? And the time before that? How many groups, Mason? How many people have you led here?" The truth spilled out in broken sentences. Mason had discovered the symbols 3 years ago, ancient markings that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. He'd found old journals describing their power, the ability to open doorways to somewhere else. But it required sacrifice. 5 people. Always 5. "The first group was an accident," Mason said. "I didn't know what would happen. But afterward, it offered me things. Knowledge, power. All I had to do was bring more people." Ivy screamed. The symbols around us began to glow with a sickly blue light. Mason reached for his pack, but his hand passed through it like smoke. His eyes widened in terror. "It's starting," Elena whispered. "The doorways are opening." Mason's body began to fade, becoming transparent. He reached toward us, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Then he was gone, leaving only his flashlight spinning on the ground, beam cutting through the mist that suddenly surrounded us. The symbols pulsed brighter. Trevor's distant laughter echoed through the trees, but it wasn't his voice anymore. It was something trying to remember how human laughter should sound. Elena grabbed my arm. "Mason didn't understand," she said. "He thought he was in control, but he was just another sacrifice. Like all of us, like his other groups. The symbols don't make deals, they feed." The temperature dropped further. Ice crystals formed in the air around us. Somewhere in the darkness, something moved between the trees, its shape wrong in ways I couldn't describe. And all around us, the symbols continued to spread, carving themselves into every surface, glowing like toxic stars fallen to earth. Ivy disappeared next. One moment she was beside me. The next, empty space. No scream, no struggle. Just gone, like she'd never existed. But we could hear her crying somewhere in the darkness, the sound coming from directions that shouldn't exist. "The symbols are doorways," Elena explained as we ran. "Left by something ancient, something that lives in the spaces between spaces, in the gaps between trees where your eyes don't want to focus. We pushed through the undergrowth, branches catching at our clothes. The forest seemed to shift around us, paths appearing and disappearing. Trees grew twisted, their trunks warping into impossible shapes. I was here last year, Elena continued, her voice tight with fear. 8 of us came in. I was the only one who made it out, but I didn't escape. It let me go. It needed someone to bring more people back. The symbols were everywhere now, burning with that strange blue light. They seemed to watch us as we passed, pulsing in patterns that hurt my eyes. Trevor's laughter echoed again, joined by Mason's voice calling for help and Ivy's distant sobs. All wrong. All twisted together. Don't look directly at them, Elena warned. The symbols, they change you, make you into something that can exist in those spaces where nothing should live. Something moved in the darkness ahead. It looked like Trevor, but wrong. Too tall, joints bending backward, mouth stretched in an impossible smile. Behind him, shapes shifted that my mind couldn't process. Geometries that shouldn't exist in our reality. 4 doorways, Elena whispered. It always needs 4 doorways open before the final one, before it can fully enter our world. I turned to ask her what she meant, but her face had changed. In the blue light of the symbols, I could see the truth. She'd been changed already, transformed by her last visit to these woods. She wasn't running from the symbols anymore. She was running toward them. And somewhere in the darkness, something ancient and hungry was waiting for both of us. I'm alone now, recording this on my dying phone. Elena revealed her true purpose. She wasn't a survivor. She was a harbinger. Changed by her last visit, she'd been working with the entity all along, helping it complete the ritual that failed last year. The forest has transformed completely. The trees have grown impossible, their branches reaching in directions that defy physics. The symbols burn like stars, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. I can see my friends in the darkness, but they're not human anymore. Trevor dances between the trees, his body a twisted parody of human form. Mason's voice calls from everywhere at once, begging for help that will never come. Ivy's sobs echo from spaces that shouldn't exist, and through it all, Elena's laughter rings out, no longer pretending to be human. The entity is revealing itself now. I can see it moving through the spaces between trees, unfolding in ways that make my mind recoil. It exists in dimensions beyond our understanding, and the symbols are its way of reaching into our world. 4 doorways open. Elena's voice whispers from behind me. 1 more to go. Don't fight it. The change is beautiful, once you accept it. My flashlight is dying, but I can still see them approaching. My former companions, transformed into something beyond human. Their bodies twist and shift, existing in multiple spaces at once. The symbols have burned themselves into my vision, and I can feel the forest reaching for me with hands that aren't hands. If anyone finds this recording, stay away from hiking forums, stay away from perfect clearings in ancient woods. The entity is always hunting, always hungry, always looking for 5 more people to open its doorways. Because we were never meant to leave these woods. We were meant to become part of them. Part of the spaces between trees. Part of the darkness that lives where light fears to go. And now, as my phone dies and the last light fades, I understand why they're all laughing. The final doorway is opening, and I can feel myself beginning to change.